Hey everyone. So today I wanted to do like a learning session and record it so that we can all kind of watch it in our own time. I wanted to present a library called pydantic and hopefully like show you why it's so awesome. And we're gonna do this in a pretty fun way. We're gonna be live coding um, an API client to a new API that OneFootball is opening to the world, the network API. And not everything is planned. I'm going to start with a little presentation about pydantic, really quick, a couple of slides, and then I'm going to move on to the live coding, and it should be a pretty fun hour or so. So let's get going. So before pydantic, why are we even talking about pydantic? Pydantic is a library that comes in the in the field of like type annotations. It actually leverages type annotation quite a bit. So before we go into that, what can we say about Python typing? So you might have noticed that since Python 3.6, basically you can use type annotations in Python, and Python is what's called a dynamically typed language as opposed to a static typed language. I'm not going to enter into the details there, but usually Python is pretty loose and it doesn't enforce you any typing, and that's why it's also such a simple language to learn, and that's why it's kind of nice. But lately we've seen some other languages that are also dynamically typed, like Python, that are going also in the direction of more typing, and it's the case of JavaScript, for example, that went into the direction of TypeScript that was started with by Microsoft, and so it's sort of the sense of history, like I wrote here. One of the reasons why it's so good is because it works well with what's called static type checking. So there are libraries like MyPy from Dropbox or PyType from Google that basically are able to analyze your code and the typing annotations that you put there, and they are able to catch bugs pretty early, even before you run your code, right? So before you run your code anywhere, it's going to just pick up the typing errors and let you know that something must be wrong here. The second thing that's really cool is what's called autocompletion. So in your coding interface, your IDE, whether you use VS Code or PyCharm or whatever, you're going to get autocompletion for free thanks to those types. So basically when you're going to start to type a function or anything in Python, you're going to have this nice pop-up documentation that says, hey, the next argument should be an integer or it should be whatever. So that's really cool. And then the third point that I put on here is that you get documentation for free, and that's mostly true for for example, your like when you generate documentation of your codes, for example, with something like there are libraries for that called like Sphinx or mkdocs, or it's also true on the web side of things when you start building documentation like the OpenAPI specification. It will generate a lot of the type annotations for your documentation automatically, right? So in your documentation, when you document a function or something like this, it will automatically generate all the type annotations for you, and that's pretty awesome. And there are a couple of more things that typing gives you, but I didn't want to go too much into those. But that's, for example, bridging to other languages like C or Rust, which are typed languages. So you need a way to tell Python how to bind with those. Same with database query mapping. So for a database is statically typed, so you need to tell it how to map to each types in the database, etc., etc. If you're interested, there was a talk at EuroPython 2020 by Dustin Hoffman from Google, who was working on PyType, which was called static typing in Python, which goes into more details. So where does pydantic lie in the world of all the Python libraries, right? So I try to display like free free bubbles of things that hopefully will give you a sense of where pydantic lies. So the first thing on the left here are the type data objects. So there is something in Python called the data classes. They allow you to create objects in a very readable way with type annotations for the arguments, and pydantic is drawing a lot from that newish way of creating objects. Then there is the second area which you might have run into if you've done backend development before in Python, but it's called marshalling, and marshalling is basically a way to transform like most often JSON data, for example, to transform it into an object, and that object inside your application, the JSON data will not be JSON data, it will be turned into that object, and you will use that object to move the data inside your application. So let's say you want to do something to that incoming JSON, you might just like turn it into an object, pass the object to another function, operate on the object, and then you would then need to what we call serialize it back to JSON to then give it back to a different application. But that's what's called marshalling, and there were like libraries in that realm, like for example Marshmallow, that were really good libraries, and pydantic kind of draws a lot from them, but uses type annotations to simplify them quite a bit, right? The third area of interest here is the what's called the settings management. So that's what you need to do when you, for example, follow the 12 factor app principles, where you try to set the configuration of your application via the environment. So then you would have like an environment file or something like this with all the values in there, and you will need to pass them and into your application, and usually, like for example, you can do this with the library called python.env, but actually you can now also do this with pydantic, and it's pretty awesome. So basically what you see from here is that it's kind of killing three birds with one stone, and with that one library, pydantic, you're going to be able to do marshalling, you're going to be able to create data classes, and you're going to be able to handle your settings as well if you want to. The one thing it doesn't do, and that's why I put it on a separate bubble on the right, are to replace ORM. So ORMs are those libraries that you need when you want to speak to a database in Python. You usually would need to create data models that look a little bit like data classes actually, but you need to write them separately from your data classes, and then you need to map each column to a column in your database in order to do the query, the query mapping and everything. Like the ORM takes care of everything then for you, but you need, in your application, you need to define those models, and there are a bunch of libraries for that. Like for example, SQL Alchemy is the most used, and it would just be so awesome if pydantic was also taking care of the ORM topic, but unfortunately not yet, but we'll come back to that a bit later. So a bunch of cool things. So I will get more into those. With the demo, and I hope I will show how cool these things are. But like just as a very simple outline, the first thing that I wanted to say is that pydantic really shines for HTTP related work. So when you have to deal with data on the web, like for example an API clients, like we are going to build, or if you want to build a backend service, like we would do with a library called like Flask or FastAPI, like I'm doing for example for the tagging, or when we parse events like we do Spark workers. In all those situations, you basically parse incoming data, which more often than not is in forms of JSON, and you parse it into objects or pandas data frames, and then you want to do things with that. Well, that's where the marshalling comes into place, and that's where you can do that with pydantic and really make your code base much cleaner and yeah, and make yourself much more productive by just using pydantic. The second cool thing is that you can extend the classes with regular Python. Because those classes are regular Python classes, you can just use everything that you would use in a regular Python class, like for example the representation that you can customize. That could be useful, for example, if you want to log your objects. You can just use the native like representation function there, and then it's gonna like display the object in your logs the way you want it to. Or for example, the property argument, so you can add a bunch of properties to the object, even though they are not part of the JSON event that comes in or whatever, but you can enrich that object with a lot of logic that just belongs there. Like that's the really cool thing, because like usually when you don't use pydantic, for example, you have that logic somewhere, but it usually ends up somewhere else in your code, right? It's gonna be next to the event somewhere, and then at some point, you just get lost, or if someone new comes in, they don't necessarily know that there is this logic going on because it's not close to the event definition. And now with these sort of things, you can really pack it together, and it's much cleaner. Third thing that I wanted to mention is the custom types that pydantic offers. They are, like, for example, types for parsing URLs, or in this case, like a Postgres connection URL. It's called Postgres DSM. And so, for example, in your environment variable, when you configure your application to talk to, let's say, a data warehouse or a database with a Postgres URL, pydantic would be able to just parse it, validate it, and give you give it back to you as an object, and that's pretty cool. The last thing I wanted to mention here was that you can use these models recursively. Sorry, and we're going to get into that later. But that's really amazing, because you can really, once you get a JSON in front of you, you can really specify all the nested level, all the nested objects that are in there, and then everything kind of works seamlessly, and it's just like very, very powerful. So what's not there, and what would I like to check next? I just mentioned it a bit earlier, but it's this thing with ORMs. So I reached out on Twitter to Sebastian Ramirez, who is the creator of pydantic, and who's working for Explosion, the company behind Spacey here in Berlin. And I was asking, like, I heard that you were maybe looking into this, and that would be really awesome. And he replied with like a little experiment that he did 2 weeks ago. You see July 27. He has not released that yet, but he's working on this in his own time. But you see that he basically created like a pydantic model that is at the same time a SQL alchemy model. So it's also at the same time an ORM model. And this is really this is really cool for the future, because it means that when you're doing like backend engineering in Python, it's just like gonna make our life much easier, and it makes everything much cleaner, and it's just like really, really awesome. So what do we have today as an outline for the demo? First, I'm going to set up the project with something called Cookie Cutter, just to gain some time. Then I'm going to install the two libraries we're going to be working with today: pydantic for the marshalling and everything that I just described, and requests for doing the actual HTTP requests with the API. Then we're going to move on to code a simple API client, which is going to be based on the OpenAPI specification, or the Swagger specification of the API. So it's going to be something quite low level, but I want to use that as an example to create all the data models in pydantic, and I can show like a lot of the features from pydantic. And then on top of that, we're going to take a step back and then think more in terms of who are we coding this API client for, and which basically is our users. So what do our users want? They probably, in the case of the network API, I'm going to introduce the use case later, but just after that. But in this case, they want to publish articles, modify or delete articles. So it's going to be a bit higher level things that the things we will have coded in step 3, or maybe not. We will see, but we will try to take this step back and shape it more in a more user-friendly way. And then as a last step, and that's where we're going to end up in the very, very cool stuff, what we're going to try to do is to ingest articles from a blog that is the official club of Clermont Foot, which is a French second league club from where I'm from. They're not very big, so they're not really on our list of top tier clubs that we want to reach out to for this network API. But I'm from there, so I want to have their news. So I'm just going to ingest their articles for them, and using our little clients, hopefully. So let's see. That should be pretty interesting. Yeah, I'm giving ourselves like maybe 45 minutes or so, and that should be pretty exciting. See you in a bit. I'm gonna stop the presentation now and come back with with the project set up in step 1 and 2.